intervene and stop this sentencing as requested by Trump. Judge Juan Merchan has already signaled Trump will not face jail time or probation. Regardless of the outcome, Trump will become the first president-elect convicted of a felony. CBS News contributor Jessica Levinson joins me now to talk about what's happening inside the courtroom. We have reporters in there typing out developments as they happen. Jessica, I understand they've just established that the people recommend a sentence of unconditional discharge. You and I spoke about that late last night. Help us understand what that means.
It means exactly that there will be no conditions on the discharge, that formally the president of the United States will have a conviction on his record, but he will not have to do what other people who have convictions sometimes have to do, which is everything from jail time to conditions related to probation, to things like wearing an ankle bracelet. Again, having to check in with a probationary officer, having to make sure that you stay out of trouble for a certain number of years. Nothing like that will happen. This is an acknowledgement that there was a conviction, but it's a decision based on the interests of justice that no more really needs to be, or in this case, maybe even can be done. And that the president will walk away with a conviction, but essentially nothing else in terms of concrete impact of that conviction.
And I want our viewers to be aware that this is happening in real time right now, and there will be a recording of these proceedings, an audio recording, because cameras are not allowed inside this courtroom. As soon as that is available, we will bring it to you all. Jessica, late last night, you and I were discussing the breaking news of the Supreme Court refusing to intervene in today's sentencing as requested by Trump and his legal team. The Supreme Court, in their ruling, saying that that's because they believe Trump can continue any appeal following an ordinary course, and indicating that this unconditional discharge was expected anyway. Help us understand what that means for Trump, who, in response to that, said he does intend to appeal the sentencing.
Well, what it means is that the Supreme Court was not willing to, or at least in a 5-4 decision, which I have to admit is closer than I expected, they decided that they would not parachute in and push pause on this sentencing. And what it means is that somebody in the 5-4, I think, said, we want language that explains why, because they could have just said no. But instead, they decided to explain their reasoning. And one is because the normal course of appeals are available to the president as they are available to any other person. But two, and I think this is actually more interesting, it's something you asked me about last night, Errol, is the idea of basically, yes, there will be a sentence, but there will not be a sentence in the way that people expect. There will be nothing more for the president to do. So I think that's a way of saying, why are you asking us here when, if you think you have live issues on appeal, bring them. And it's not like the president will be sitting inside a jail cell. There isn't anything really that will impede his ability to do his job as president. I think it's fascinating that the split was so close. And it's fascinating that, as Jan Crawford pointed out also last night, and you and I talked about, that language was added to explain that it really is because Judge Merchan indicated that there would be this kind of sentence without a sentence, for lack of a better way of describing it.
We're following the breaking news with Jessica Levinson of President-elect Donald Trump appearing virtually in the New York courtroom you see on your screen to face sentencing in his criminal trial from here in New York. I want to now bring in CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Zhang, who is in West Palm Beach, Florida. Weijia, we understand the president appearing virtually is seated next to his lawyer, Mr. Blanche, and they've confirmed they are in Florida. Help us understand what Team Trump is saying about this hearing and plans to do next.
Errol, it's great to see you. Last night here in West Palm Beach, President-elect Trump actually hosted a dinner meeting with 22 Republican governors, during which he made remarks about what was to happen today. And it's interesting because in his words, he really tried to downplay it. He said he actually read the SCOTUS ruling and thought it was fair because it did mention that he could appeal, which he says he intends to do. And he said, so, you know, tomorrow I'm going to go do my, quote, little thing and have, the judge able to play with his, quote, political opponent. So he's really trying to say it's no big deal that he's going to sit through this proceeding and there's not going to be any penalty. But I thought what was really telling, Errol, was the fact that he said he would appeal because even though he doesn't have to face any practical consequences, he used the word psychologically he wanted to appeal, which is his intention. And also, I think the actions here speak much louder than his words. The fact that he did issue 2 emergency motions, not only to the Supreme Court, but to the New York Court of Appeals to try to block exactly what is unfolding right now. Because even though he doesn't have to serve prison time or pay fines or go on probation, this is now cementing his criminal record. It is now cementing his status as a convicted felon, which, of course, he does not want. So even though he is trying to brush this off in his Trumpian way, this is a big deal, and the Trump team realizes that because he is making history as the first convicted felon who is a president of the United States. And so I don't know exactly how much interaction the president-elect will have during these proceedings, how much he can say. But certainly this is going to hang over him just 10 days, Errol, before his inauguration.
Yeah, Weijia, it really is remarkable. We understand President-elect Trump does have the opportunity to make remarks. It does not seem as if he has said anything just yet. Again, our team is inside the courtroom typing out information to us in real time. Weijia, what you've just laid out is factually accurate. He'll be the first president convicted of a felony and now serving a sentence, no matter how soft it may be. But will it make any difference to the average American as far as policy is concerned when you've got Republican governors there in West Palm Beach at Mar-a-Lago meeting with Trump? He's going to meet with Republican House members soon. Democratic Senator John Fetterman wants to meet with him as well. What difference might this make politically?
Errol, I think that was answered back in November, on November 8th, 2024, because he was already convicted of these 34 counts in this so-called hush money case. Just a reminder to our viewers, he was convicted for paying $130,000 to adult film actress Stormy Daniels as part of a hush money payment before the 2016 presidential election. So all of that had already happened. The trial was over. We knew the sentencing was going to happen, and yet the American people voted for Trump and put him into office. So I think politically for him at this time, his team would argue that it doesn't matter because even though that had already unfolded, he was still able to beat Vice President Kamala Harris and win the White House again. Of course, history is very different. How this will be studied, how future generations will reflect on this is a different question. But in terms of practically, this is also not the first of the legal troubles that we have covered for President-elect Trump. And it does seem that everything else that people have voted on outweighs his record, his dealings, his investigations. And so, Errol, I think no matter what, even if it is not removed from his record, even though this sentencing is proceeding, it is a win for Trump. In fact, his entire legal team spent years forming this strategy to make sure that he wouldn't have to serve prison time if ultimately convicted.
Yeah, all of that really relevant and useful information. And just so our viewers are aware, President-elect Trump was convicted of falsifying business records in order to cover up a hush money payment of $130,000 to a pornographic actress before the 2016 election. This was a unanimous decision by a jury of his peers. Weijia Jiang is reporting to us from West Palm Beach in Florida. Weijia, stand by where you are. We also have Jessica Levinson, our legal contributor, who is digesting the details of what's being discussed inside the courtroom that we see on our screens. I find it interesting, Jessica, that they do note that some 10 times the judge found Trump in contempt of court during the proceedings because of his rhetoric. I'm wondering what's jumping out at you from what you're seeing them discuss right now.
I think you're exactly right. I noted that the prosecution here essentially understanding that it's January 10th and there are very few practical options, but going on the record and saying that and I'm going to paraphrase here, that the defendant's conduct has been an attack on the rule of law itself. That apparently the probationary court found that this defendant thinks he is above the law. And exactly as you also highlighted, that there were 10 counts here, that there were 10 findings of contempt. And that is significant because what the prosecution is laying out and what would have in another world made a difference is aggravating factors, right? All of this goes to the idea that in some other situation where it is Mr. Trump, not President Trump, that there are reasons that there might be jail time in a case, even though we are talking about nonviolent felonies. Or there might be something more significant than what we're seeing today, which is really just going to be, let's be honest, symbolic, an acknowledgement that there was a conviction, but really nothing more. And the prosecution, again, going on the record and saying, here are all the ways that we believe that the president thumbed his nose at these proceedings, at the rule of law, saying this is a direct attack on the judicial system. Again, I'm paraphrasing. Right now, it sounds like President Trump's team is responding with, obviously, because they are vigorous defenders, a very different narrative of what they say happened in the courtroom.
And I believe at this moment the court may be hearing from President-elect Trump for the first time. Some of that commentary being typed out as we speak. I want to let that fall for a moment as we look at what appear to be the first images. President-elect Trump is appearing remotely. We understand from West Palm Beach. You see him there, seated next to his attorney, Todd Blanche, who vehemently defended him during that 6-week trial in May of 2024. The latest commentary from Trump and his team is that they say this has been a terrible experience and a tremendous setback for New York and the New York court system. We'll continue to look at these images. Our team is inside typing out feverishly the commentary between the prosecution, the defense, and the judge as a sentence will officially be levied against Donald Trump, one of unconditional discharge. Let's cross to Weijia Zhang, who is in West Palm Beach, watching all of this in real time with us. Weijia, help us understand who is with Trump, how they're defending him, and what they plan to do next.
So, Errol, I'm also watching in real time as our colleagues type out exactly what Trump is saying right now. He, of course, is with his legal team. He's saying this has been a very terrible experience. I think it's been a tremendous setback for New York and the New York court system, which really echoes what he has said, including last night, blaming Judge Marchand for acting in a political way, saying that he is a corrupt judge and that this case should never have been brought. And that's also why he said in a lengthy statement, Errol, last night, that he does intend to appeal this case. And so even though there will not be a penalty in practice, as we mentioned before, this is something that matters to Trump and his legal team because it will now be on his record for so long. And so we are watching in real time as all of this plays out. We knew that he was likely going to speak, and he is speaking right now. We're waiting for more updates. But again, I just think it's so fascinating that he tried to stop exactly what is happening right now. And we should note that, 2 conservative justices joined 3 liberals in that Supreme Court decision to allow the sentencing to move forward. And that includes one of the justices that he nominated and appointed, which was Justice Amy Coney Barrett. And so there's a lot to be said there because there was an assumption that any justice that he sent to the Supreme Court would somehow be carrying water for him. And this is a huge example of how that is not playing out. You're seeing on your screen now the first quote that we have from the president-elect calling this a terrible experience. And so the next step, again, is for his team to appeal the verdict, to appeal this case. And that is the other reason why the Supreme Court allowed this to continue. They said he has all the tools that any defendant would have to try to appeal, Errol.
That's exactly right. And Weija, with our team of reporters inside the courtroom sharing details from President-elect Trump's ongoing statements, we can also share that he is saying things in the courtroom that are similar to what we've heard him say outside. He says he was indicted for things, and it's incredible to have been indicted for certain things. He says he was indicted for business records. He's calling this a political witch hunt. He believes this entire trial was done to damage his reputation so that he would lose the 2024 election. Those comments coming from Trump in just the last few moments. He also, in his statement, said it was a case that Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg did not want to bring, according to Trump. He's also citing legal scholars who did not believe that he should have been charged for the accusations that he was ultimately found guilty of. And he's citing so-called experts like Jonathan Turley and people who have appeared on news networks, including Alan Dershowitz. This is unfolding in real time. President-elect Donald Trump appearing virtually in a New York courthouse as he is facing sentencing after being found guilty on 34 criminal counts of falsifying business records in May of 2024. I'm Errol Barnett at the CBS Broadcast Center in New York. Weija Zhang has been giving us an update from West Palm Beach, and Jessica Levinson, our legal contributor, has been helping us understand what this all means as well. And we understand that as soon as an audio recording of what's unfolding in the courthouse is made available, we will bring that to you live. No matter how you slice it, this is a historic day in the United States, having never before seen a president-elect in such a circumstance, a former president, and someone who now is at the head of the Republican Party. His party will have majorities in Congress and will shape American policy for the next 4 years at least. A remarkable moment that Donald Trump, not just a convicted felon, but in the next few moments will be facing sentencing. Just taking a moment to see the latest information that's being shared with us, and it appears that they continue to provide details on both sides. And just a reset for our viewers, it is now 10 a.m. here on the East Coast in New York City. I'm Errol Barnett at the CBS Broadcast Center, bringing you this breaking news. President-elect Donald Trump now facing sentencing for his criminal trial in New York City. He's appearing virtually. You see those images on your screen alongside his lawyer, Todd Blanche. And Trump has repeated some of the things that he's had said privately, that this is a witch hunt and that he shouldn't have faced these charges in the first place. He does intend to appeal. That does it for me for now. My colleague Vladimir Duthier continues our coverage.
Errol, thank you very much, my friend. Appreciate it. As you all have been following right along with Errol, President-elect Donald Trump is being sentenced in his New York criminal conviction. Last night, the Supreme Court refused to stop the sentencing. Judge Juan Merchan has already signaled that Trump will not face jail time or probation. Regardless of the outcome, the president-elect will become the first president convicted of a felony. I want to bring in Jessica Levinson for more on this. She's a CBS News legal contributor and a professor at Loyola Law School. Jessica, what do we expect? I mean, given that there will be no penalties, what do you expect to hear from the judge?
Maybe an explanation again of why there will be no penalties. And let's be honest that President Trump's legal team has been incredibly successful in pushing the sentencing to this point. They, of course, did request the delay and pushing it to the point where it is not practicable to have any sentence other than what we're going to see here, which is an unconditional release. Vlad, you know this. This is the proverbial slap on the wrist. It is symbolic. It is an acknowledgement that there was a conviction, and it is essentially no more. Unconditional means that. No conditions, no strings attached. The president will not have to obviously serve any jail time, check in with a probationary officer. And what we can expect is essentially for the judge to say, I heard the prosecution, I heard the defense. Here is why I'm handing down this particular sentence. Some judges like to give their reasoning from the bench more than others, given the historic moment. It will be interesting to see how much of his reasoning Judge Merchan wants to provide to all of us.
And just, I guess the question for a lot of people, Jessica, will be, what could that reasoning possibly be? Is it a political one? Is it a legal one? What do you think?
Well, I think it's an acknowledgement of reality. And maybe there's a better way of phrasing that, but it's an acknowledgement that this defendant is about to occupy the Oval Office, is about to be the head of the executive branch. It's January 10th. The inauguration is January 20th. And we are here for a variety of different reasons. But the idea that you could put the president behind bars, the idea that you could put any sort of serious conditions on the head of the executive branch, I think raises some significant practical and legal questions. President Trump's legal team has brought the legal theory that this sentencing alone could interfere with the president's ability to take care to faithfully execute the laws. That's the language from the Constitution, as you know, Vlad. So anything more than this symbolic sentence, and I think you have a more significant argument that there would be potentially some interference with the president's ability to do his job. Vlad, I know you know this, when it comes to questions of presidential immunity, we do wrap a bubble around the president. And I'm not just talking about the Supreme Court decision from last term. I'm talking about all the way back to the Nixon administration, where there's an acknowledgement that, yes, no person is above the law, but actually the president of the United States, we need to essentially protectively bubble wrap them so they can do what they need to do. And I think that's what part of what we might hear from the judge today.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, because I was thinking as I was listening to you that would this mean that there is a legal precedent for someone else, an ordinary American citizen who has been convicted of a crime, to right now there are restrictions in some states on who can do what when you have a criminal conviction on your record. They range from employment to a variety of different things that you cannot do if you have a criminal record. I wonder if there's a way to use a legal to make a legal argument that if the president of the United States, which by the way, the founding fathers, as you know, wanted the presidency. The president is the commander in chief is a civilian. In other words, he is an ordinary citizen, yes, tasked with enormous power, but still a citizen, not a military leader, not a monarch. So I wonder if there's a way to suggest that if I have a criminal record for something, that I should use what the precedent is being set here with President-elect Trump.
If I ever find myself on the wrong side of the law, I think I want you as my attorney, because I love the idea that we could potentially use this as an argument for other people. What I would say is, as somebody who teaches all those presidential immunity and all the executive privilege cases, I think this really is confined to the president. It doesn't mean that smart lawyers won't try and make the argument that you have laid out today. It means that when it comes to all of those other people who cannot do things, who restrictions are put on them by virtue of the convictions, we're basically okay with that. You're exactly right that there was a fear when it came to the founding fathers of giving the president and frankly anyone else too much power, right? That's why we have three branches. That's why in other Western democracies, there's two branches. We disperse power because we feared the concentration of power. Having said that, again, go back to the Nixon administration, go back to the Watergate tapes cases, go back to another case where President Nixon was essentially sued for wrongful termination. And you'll see the Supreme Court saying over and over again, it's something about the president. We need to protect him because unlike a member of Congress, he is really acting alone in many cases, and we can't have him distracted. We can't have his ability to do his job undermined. So that's ultimately where I would come down on the constitutional question that you raise.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And the judge just now, Jessica, while you were speaking, has said this, and I'm quoting here, it is the legal protections afforded to the office of the President of the United States that are extraordinary, not the occupant of the office. So break that. It's essentially what Judge Merchan is saying is sort of what you just broke down for us.
This is something that you hear from lawyers and judges a lot, which is when it comes to protecting the president, it is not protecting Barack Obama or Joe Biden or Donald Trump. It is protecting whoever is in the Oval Office because they serve us. And it's in part why there's this division between the Office of Legal Counsel and a president's personal attorneys, for instance, where you see Judge Merchan saying and having to acknowledge that he is looking at a defendant who is about to, again, be head of the executive branch. He is looking at a defendant who will enjoy many protections that, Vlad, you and I do not, by virtue of that fact. And so he's saying clearly, this isn't about protecting a private individual. It's about protecting that office. And it is a clear and, I think, important statement from the judge.
So, Jessica, just stand by. We're going to continue our discussion, but we expect a CBS News special report will take place because the judge has just wrapped up, Jessica. And so I may end up cutting you off, or I may end up cutting myself off once that special report comes to air. But again, it does seem, and I think this is an interesting point that you're making and the judge is reinforcing, which is that I think when people talk about what has happened to the president-elect, they always reference it in terms of the man, the individual. Well, President-elect Donald Trump got away with it, or he is not being held accountable for his actions. And in this case, and in the way that you've described it, and what the judge appears to be also suggesting is you have to distance the office of the presidency from the individual.
Well, that's right. And I mean, this is a situation where I was just struck by the fact that if you listen to the prosecution and then listen to the defense and the different, very different narratives that they tell about this case, that's essentially how we see a lot of things in America in 2025 now. Yeah. And I understand we're going to special report.
We are, Jessica. Thank you very, very much for your time as always. As we just indicated, the judge has ruled unconditional discharge for President-elect in New York. Stand by for CBS News special report.
This is a CBS News special report. I'm Norah O'Donnell, and we are coming on the air as President-elect Donald Trump is sentenced in the so-called hush money case. The judge just sentenced Trump to an additional discharge for his 34 felonies unanimously decided by a New York jury. And it's an unconditional discharge, to be clear. Trump spoke virtually from his Mar-a-Lago resort saying, quote, "This has been a very terrible experience. I think it has been a tremendous setback for New York and the New York court system." He later added, "The fact is, I'm totally innocent. I did nothing wrong." Now, just as a reminder, the president-elect was convicted in May of last year on charges related to payments to adult film actress Stormy Daniels. That was all up in the lead up to the 2016 election. This today formalizes Trump's status as a convicted felon and makes him the first to carry that title into the White House. Trump and his lawyers had tried tirelessly to delay today's proceedings, taking their appeal all the way to the Supreme Court. Then we heard from the Supreme Court last night, and they ruled in a 5-4 decision that the sentencing could take place today, including 2 of the conservative justices siding with 3 in the liberal wing of the Supreme Court. I want to bring in our congressional correspondent, Scott MacFarlane. And Scott, what does unconditional discharge mean?
It means this case is over. It has been wrapped up. That's the final chapter in this story. And what the judge says in explaining the unconditional discharge is that a prison sentence or a further sentence would serve no practical purpose. It wouldn't do any good. That's the type of thing, Nora, we'd see when there's a major health concern for a defendant or a geriatric defendant, somebody who couldn't be reasonably put in prison or put on probation and serve any ends.
I want to bring in our chief election campaign correspondent, Robert Costa. Trump appearing virtually from Mar-a-Lago and once again strongly defending himself.
He did strongly defend himself, Nora, but we see from the president-elect defiance at this moment and disregard for the criminal conviction. He will continue to appeal it. He's unhappy with the Supreme Court. But there is a sense, based on my reporting inside Trump's inner circle, that this conviction and this unconditional sentencing will not be a burden on his presidency once he takes office later this month.
I bring in CBS News legal contributor and criminal defense attorney Caroline Polisi. She is with us. And Caroline, I just want to point out what the prosecutor said heading into this. His name is Joshua Steinglass. He blasted Trump before this sentencing, saying that rather than expressing any remorse for his criminal acts, that Trump has spread disdain for our institutions and the rule of the law. He said the defendant has caused enduring damage to public perception of the criminal justice system and placed officers of the court in harm's way. The president's attorney responding, I very, very much disagree. So, Caroline, I do want to ask you, what does this mean, though, in terms of the legal precedent, if any, that it sets?
Yeah, that's right, Nora. In a lot of ways, this was just a procedural bookend and really some legal theater in that it is very rare for both the prosecution and the defense to know in advance of sentencing that the sentence will be an unconditional discharge, which essentially is exactly what it sounds like. It's not even a slap on the wrist. There is no jail time, obviously, but no fines, no conditions, no restitution, no, community service, even nothing being imposed here. And so really you saw the prosecutor Steinglass just getting on the record Trump's disdain for the rule of law. But, we talk a lot about whether or not Trump is above the law. And I think today really solidified the fact that he is, in that the Supreme Court enshrined this idea of presidential immunity. We talked when he was convicted in this case. We were debating whether or not jail time would be imposed, but I don't think anybody thought that there would be this unconditional discharge after he was elected. All of a sudden, this is what is happening. And so, as noted, this case is not over. He will continue to exercise his appellate rights.
Caroline, I have to ask you because Judge Merchan, in issuing that unconditional discharge, said he does that because he has to do it without encroaching on the highest post in the land. Does that negate at all that the president-elect now becomes the only president to have been sentenced on criminal charges?
Yeah, look, it's a huge deal symbolically. This was a win for the Manhattan DA's office, but in a lot of senses, it was a Pyrrhic victory. Look, one hallmark of the criminal justice system is retribution, and that was not done here. However, for now, at least, his conviction is sort of enshrined procedurally. He will remain a convicted felon while in office. There's nothing that bars him from holding office while being a convicted felon. And again, I think the headline that SCOTUS refused to stop this proceeding today, the lead there really is that it was a 5-4 decision. And they indicated that these issues, these evidentiary issues regarding potential presidential immunity could and potentially would be taken up on appeal. So signaling there that, they were open potentially to the fact of reviewing this case and certainly could get back to the Supreme Court.
That's a really interesting and important point. Caroline, I want to bring in CBS's Katrina Kaufman. She has followed this trial in its entirety. She was inside the courthouse today. Now she's outside the courthouse for us. And give us some of the color of what we saw inside.
Nora, it's great to join you. It was such a unique experience in there because the courtroom was filled with all of the familiar faces of the court reporters, of the sketch artists, but Trump and his attorney, Todd Blanche, were presented on a screen to us. One of his attorneys, Emil Bovee, was in the courtroom, but this was an allowance that they made for Donald Trump, also to lessen the burden of the sentencing on him. It played a role in the Supreme Court, even allowing this to move forward. It was also remarkable to hear Trump speak on his own behalf, but in such a different way than you would normally hear a defendant speak at his own criminal trial. Usually that's to express remorse, to try to explain their actions. Trump sat there and really just defended himself, continued to proclaim his innocence and the injustice of this trial.
Katrina Kaufman, thank you. And Robert Costa, this is still a truly unprecedented, historic-making movement because the the president-elect is going to be inaugurated just 10 days from now. And even though it was virtual, he was in a courtroom today.
So while this procedure today can seem like a bit of a whimper, not a bang, legally speaking, historically, it is so notable. Just think, Nora, months ago, I was speaking with you. I was at the courtroom when then former President Trump was sentenced in New York in late May. He was at his political bottom. He looked like he was not going to win the presidency. People inside the Republican Party said, we now have a convict who's going to be our nominee at the convention. It looked bleaker than ever for Trump. Now here we are in January of 2025. Scott has done such great work on the January 6th investigations at the federal level. That has fallen away for the most part, not moving forward with prosecution. Same when it comes to classified records. And Trump, instead of losing the election in the wake of a conviction, is now the president-elect of the United States, has declared he has a mandate and has Republican majorities on Capitol Hill. Such a turnaround in American history in less than a year.
But, Scott, this is not the end of the president's legal troubles or reporting or reports coming out about his legal troubles, right?
By the end of the day today, we could get the final report of what Special Counsel Jack Smith found in his investigation of efforts to overturn the 2020 elections. An appeals court in Atlanta could free up the Attorney General to release that today. Many people have been interested in reading what Jack Smith found, perhaps more than what he put in his charging documents. And Nora, one footnote. The defense attorney for Donald Trump today in that virtual hearing was Todd Blanche. That is going to be Donald Trump's nominee to be the #2 official at the Justice Department beginning this year.
And that is a very crucial post at the Attorney General's office and in the Justice Department. Thank you, Robert Costa, Scott McFarlane, also to Caroline Polisi and Katrina Kaufman. Our coverage will continue on CBS News 24/7, your local news, and then tonight on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News special report. I'm Nora O'Donnell.
All right, folks, you've been watching a CBS News special report anchored by CBS Evening News and anchor, managing editor of the Evening News, Nora O'Donnell. If you're just joining us, Judge Juan Merchan has ruled an unconditional discharge in the New York hush money criminal trial of President-elect Donald Trump. I want to bring in Jessica Levinson for more on this. She's a CBS News legal contributor and a professor at Loyola Law School. So, Jessica, the judge said it is the legal protections afforded to the office of the president that are extraordinary, not the occupant of the office. Your take on what we just saw in New York City?
I think what we just saw is a judge acknowledging reality, that he is not facing any criminal defendant or a convicted criminal. In fact, he is facing the former and, more importantly, future president of the United States. And Vlad, as we've been talking about, that is a person who, by virtue of the office that they inhabit, not by virtue of who they are, but by virtue of their job, they enjoy protections. They enjoy protections from being sued civilly for official conduct. They enjoy protections from criminal liability for criminal liability for official conduct. And what we're seeing here is, of course, that extends to any real potential sentence, that the judge is not going to say, I will be the person who puts strings and restrictions on the occupant of the Oval Office. Again, because of how our Constitution is structured, because of all of that case law indicating that we need to protect the office of the presidency.
So, Jessica, stand by. I want to bring in CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang. She's in West Palm Beach. I know this just happened, Weijia, but are you hearing any indication that we will expect to hear from the president-elect today on what just transpired in a New York City courtroom?
Vlad, you're right that it just wrapped up, and we did hear from Trump inside that proceeding. As for whether he'll make remarks today, you just never know when you're talking about Trump, and he could very well feel like adding more to what he said inside the courtroom, because we know this has been hanging over him. In fact, he made remarks about it last night, trying to downplay the sentencing, saying that he actually agreed with the Supreme Court's decision not to block the sentencing, because he says the justices mentioned that he could appeal. which is exactly what he plans to do. But he also said that, he's going to go and do his, quote, little thing today, meaning show up during the proceeding, and that his political opponent, Marchand, in this case, the judge, would be able to have, quote, fun with him. And so he tried to brush it off in his words, Vlad, but his actions, of course, spoke much louder, because he did try to stop this sentencing from happening, because even though he doesn't have to pay a penalty, this does now solidify him as a convicted felon. This will now be part of his criminal record forever. And so when he talked about appealing, he said he would do it. And he said that even though he doesn't have to pay any consequences or penalties, he's doing it, quote, psychologically, Vlad. So it's really interesting that he spoke about this last night and used that word to describe why he is going to contest this, because he knows in his mind that he is a convict. And so, as to answer your original question, I wouldn't be surprised at all if we did hear more from President-elect Trump today here in West Palm Beach.
All right, Weijia Jiang for us, reporting from West Palm Beach. Thank you, Weijia, as always. We appreciate you. Let's bring in CBS News political reporter and attorney Katrina Kaufman, who's joining me now from outside that courthouse in New York City. You were sitting in the courtroom, Katrina. Give us some color. What'd you see? What'd you hear?
Hi, Vlad. Great to be with you. It was a very different atmosphere in that courtroom today. You could almost feel how much more relaxed it was without the anticipation of Trump's arrival. But there were still all of the courtroom reporters there, the sketch artists. There was the usual photography spray, but this time they were shooting the screen with Trump and his attorney, Todd Blanche, on it. As you can see in that photo, they were sitting with American flags behind them. And Trump only seemed semi-interested during all this. He was looking down quite a bit, but then, really perked up when he heard the prosecution talking about the charges against him. And there really just was a gravity, though, to hearing Justice Marchand proclaim this sentence and also really imply that he would have wanted to impose a harsher sentence on Donald Trump if it wasn't for the strictures of the presidency, the office that Marchand said Trump is about to occupy. But he really emphasized that what's extraordinary is the protections that are afforded that office, not the occupant, he said.
Yeah. And so the question, of course, going forward is just sort of what this will mean larger, a bigger picture, Katrina, as an attorney, the idea that a president of the United States is now also a convicted felon. I know that we've normalized the president-elect over the course of the last 8 years, but this is really extraordinary. And we often use the word unprecedented, but this is unprecedented.
I mean, it really is, Vlad, in every way. And, what's extraordinary is that there are many jobs and things that a convicted felon cannot do in the United States, but we now have one who is going to be leading our country. Even though a jury verdict had come in from this trial with these 34 counts finding Trump guilty, the American people still decided to elect him president. And what this sentencing does is it's really a note of finality, branding him as a convicted felon just 10 days before inauguration.
All right, Katrina Kaufman, we appreciate you as always, my friend. Jessica Levinson, Weijia Jiang, all of you who've been contributing to our coverage of this extraordinary day in a New York City courtroom. Thank you all very much. I want to let our viewers know that we're also going to be getting audio from the courtroom soon, and we're going to bring that to you as soon as it comes in. Meanwhile, some other news to get to, including the stories that we've been following all day. This will include analysis on America Decides and the Daily Report, which you can catch now on Fridays. Did you know that, Ryan? I did. You can find it on Fridays now. America Decides is on at 5 p.m. Eastern, and the Daily Report starts at 6 Eastern. Okay, back to the news that we've been tracking all week, the apocalyptic scenes coming to us from Los Angeles as residents survey the damage left behind from several wildfires. But the threat is far from over as crews still struggle to contain the flames. We are live on the ground. You're streaming CBS News 24/7.
Is there no room for debate on college campuses anymore? 60 Minutes brings you to the new university that is demanding it.
The stakes are that high. If our universities are screwed up, and I believe they are, then that will screw up America as a whole quite quickly.